Hi, it's Dave again, and this week we're back with the Sega CD and another game that I'm not sure if I'd heard of before I started collecting, and that's Racing Aces. Racing Aces is not a first generation Sega CD game, as you can tell by it appearing in one of the plus size jewel cases and not a cardboard box like we previously saw with Sewer Shark in episode 9, but it is an earlier Sega CD release showing up in 1993. When in 1993? Well, honestly, I don't know. When I began researching this title, trying to fill in the gaps for the review, I ended up finding out surprisingly little about the game and its creators. And a lack of an actual specific release date, or at least month, which is more common for these older titles. And I'll say this, if you happen to know better when Racing Aces hit the shelves in 93, or a specific web resource that lists that info, please comment on the video and let us all know, because I certainly couldn't find anything in the usual spots. While I've seen Racing Aces a few times out in the wild looking for other games to fill in the Zilog and Moto collection, I think that has to do with the fact that it's not necessarily an in-demand title as opposed to its rarity. Racing Aces was published by Sega, so it did hit the market legitimately and was available in usual places, but it wasn't developed by Sega. Instead, it was developed by, let me check my notes, Hammond and Leyland? What the hell are Hammond and Leyland? I certainly never heard them before, and if you out there say you have, stop. You damn well haven't heard them either. The Hammond and Leyland piece adds a bit more intrigue to this game, as just like how I couldn't find a specific release date for the game, I couldn't find out much about these developers. At first glance, these developers were only responsible for this one game, and had never done anything else. And on top of that, not only is this the only game that apparently Hammond and Leyland were responsible for, this is the only version of this game, as it was made exclusively for the Sega CD and not appear on any other console or the PC. So I started trying to dig into Hammond and Leyland a bit, and now I was really curious as to where this game had come from. And I stumbled onto some more information on the Player One podcast website and blog post by Greg Seward. I'll put a link in the article in the video summary so you can check it out if you want. And Greg, if you're seeing this, thank you for doing the research and finding out more about this game. Apparently, Hammond and Leyland was a short-lived development company founded by Greg Hammond, who was a producer at Lucasfilm, or LucasArts, and had actually worked on The Secret of Monkey Island, of all things, and ended up attempting to start his own company with a man named Robert Leyland. And Hammond and Leyland was born. Hammond and Leyland ended up changing names to Jumping Jack Software after the release of Racing Aces, which is why it's the only title out there under the Hammond Leyland banner. And they worked on a few more games in the 90s before ultimately calling it quits. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about where Racing Aces came from, what is it? Well, Racing Aces is a combat racing title, not unlike Super Mario Kart or other similar titles. However, where Racing Aces tries to differentiate itself from the pack is its concept, which is that instead of guiding cars or carts, some other vehicle around a ground-based track, you're flying airplanes of varying vintage that can be equipped with different weapons and power-ups to take on and take out other competitors in the air. And similar to other combat racing titles, you earn points and money depending on your finish in the races, with a goal to upgrade or purchase new planes and work your way through the classes of planes to ultimately win the Racing Aces Championship. I'll admit, I'm not the biggest flyboy, and I've been just as frustrated as probably the rest of you when it comes to trying to complete the flying missions in the Grand Theft Auto games. But one of my favorite types of games is that rock and roll racing style where you have to work your way through the ranks, so I'm definitely intrigued to say the least. However, the lack of success that the title and Hammond and Leyland had in general is a huge red flag, so I'm definitely approaching the rest of this review with caution. Let's take a look at the package and get on with it. Okay, Racing Aces is clearly emblazoned at the top of the front cover. And actually, I'm going to complain about this a little bit, in a similar fashion to how I complained about Dragon's Lair back in episode 33. If you take a look at the title, up here at the top, I got two problems with it. First, it's kind of small in regards to the rest of the cover. I mean, look how it's just this little area here. I know having the Sega CD label on the left side takes up a lot of room, but it still feels like the name should be a bit bigger. Also, I get they want to have a checkered flag on the cover to emphasize the racing aspect of the game. Uh, but checkered flags are not good backgrounds for text and make the title more distracting to read than it really should be. It's a minor quibble, I know, but I think little things like this speak to the small shop mentality of the developers, and that perhaps a larger company would have focused on the actual package a bit more. The cover artwork itself is nice, showcasing a nice explosion in 4 of the planes from the game, and show at least one of the planes from each of the 3 divisions that you'll have to fight through in an effort to win. Being a 1993 release, the game has a GA rating down here at the bottom from Sega's VRC, as it predates the SRB, and I think GA is appropriate. There's very little controversial here. As well, even though you attempt to blow up other planes and potentially get blown up, no one ever dies. As we flip over the case, it's looking kind of plain back here. No pun intended. Real quick, I will point out in the upper corner the welcome to the next level block, as you can kind of see here. This was like Sega's, I don't know, lead or, way edgy sort of marketing thing. And they decided to run, all the letters together, and so that, I don't know, I just think it looks ugly. I don't know what they were thinking back then. But, that's just the time period. That was their the phrase they were trying to get across, and similar to their earlier Sega does what Nintendo don't. Anyway, there's some decent flavor text here describing the game, and a lot of what I've already discussed about what you do in the game, but there's a big old hole here below the bullet points. It really seems that graphic design was just not their strong suit. It would have been pretty easy to move things around a bit and perhaps add another screenshot to fill that in, or perhaps another drawing of a plane, or anything really, besides just empty sky. Oh well. The 3 screenshots that are present are decent quality and do an accurate job of representing what the game looks like. And if you're not impressed by how it looks from the screenshots, well, more on that later. One more thing, there's a bit of an issue with the text description of the game. If you look closely, let's see if I can get it on the closest. It states, sorry, I'm having to kind of angle this here. It said, working your way through 4 stages of aircraft, and then also down below, choose from over 40 courses. Well, I'm assuming that was like in a pre-release version of the game, or something to that effect, because there's only 3 stages of aircraft to work through, not 4, and each of those stages only has 10 courses. So that gives us only 30 courses, not 40. Definitely some unforced errors here from the design staff. This copy of Racing Aces itself is in good shape. No cracks in the case anywhere, and these larger jewel cases usually are so susceptible to, and no issues with the hinges. Thank goodness, because those are always breaking. As we open it up and take a look at the manual is near perfect and almost looks like it hasn't been used at all. On the back, there's an ad for Slipheed, a Sega CD game I'm definitely excited for taking a look at later on. And then as we flip it open, there's an intact warranty card, and apparently there was a $1,000 music CD collection sweepstakes back in the day. Makes me wonder if anyone ever actually won that. Looking closer at the manual, while it's some issues with the cover design, the manual is actually pretty well done. It's got all of the information you need on how to play the game, and some various screenshots of, the diagrams, layout and everything. And then, a breakdown of the 9 planes you can get through normal gameplay. So, we got a copy of Racing Aces. It's in relatively pristine condition, which is always nice. Let's take a look at the game itself and see if this is a diamond in the rough or it looks like it hasn't been played much for a reason. Like I stated earlier, I love racing games that feature standings and earning money to upgrade your car so that you can progress and compete in higher classes. Actually, any kind of game that allows this is pretty great in my book. I remember playing Bill Lambier's Combat Basketball for the Super Nintendo, and it worked in much the same way, with upgrading and getting better players and working your team up the ladder to eventually compete in the top league. But in this case, probably a better reference is that to the hallowed rock and roll racing, which I mentioned earlier. And if you haven't played that, just stop watching this and go play it now. Then come back to watching this later, as playing rock and roll racing is certainly a better use of your time. But this review isn't for either of those titles, it's for Racing Aces. As you start out in Racing Aces, you've given three options. Race the Test Track, which is essentially two concentric ovals, one inside the other, that you can choose to pilot around and get a feel for your plane when you're not worried about getting shot down. Or a one-off race against actual competition where you have limited options about which track you fly on and what plane class. Or finally, the fully fledged tournament mode, where you will compete on the tracks in similar class planes in an attempt to earn money and points to work your way through the classes to win the championship. The inclusion of the test track and single race modes are nice, and give the player some time to get used to the game before attempting to mix it up against the computer in races that matter. However, you may want to strap in, pun fully intended, as this is probably going to be one of the last nice things I say about the game. In any type of driving game, control of your vehicle is absolutely critical, whether it's an arcade-styled racing game like Burnout, or more of a simulation-style game like Forza. To get around the track at a high rate of speed, you have to be able to corner, and depending on the degree of the turn, either turn light or really yank the wheel hard to make it around without ending up in a wall, or possibly worse, running into another vehicle. Flying planes adds another dimension of difficulty to this, literally, as now not only do you have to accurately navigate your plane left and right to get around turns and avoid competitors, you now also have to deal with flying up or down. You may think, well, flying up or down in the air really isn't that important to getting around the track. And if this was just a time trial based on a race game, yeah, you'd be right. However, in Racing Aces, it's important to also be able to change your plane's trajectory often, as the courses you're flying on are not always at the same elevation, especially if you get off track. You also need to be moving around in all directions to get power-ups spread throughout the tracks, and to avoid enemies that might be gunning for you, or take out enemies yourself to move ahead in the race. So, to reiterate, being able to control your vehicle well in a racing game is critical to how the game plays. Without that, the game will immediately lose its luster quickly, no matter how many other bells and whistles it has. You may have guessed that there's a reason I'm being so thorough about stating all this, and there is. It's because the control in Racing Aces, well, it's terrible. All the planes control very sluggish, leading to situations where when you enter very tight turns, you almost have to pre-turn and attempt to change direction before you normally would think you should. I started out playing out the game with my 8-bit do 6-button wireless pad and just could not get the planes to do what I wanted to do. Anytime I tried to turn the planes, they would invariably go way too far, and I'd be stuck trying to correct their trajectory by turning back. I switched to using a wired original Genesis 6 button, and that helped a bit, along with turning on roll control to auto in the options, which helps level the plane out after making a turn. But even with making these adjustments, turning the planes is an adventure at best, and that's kind of a problem when the best case scenario has you on a track that's a basic oval or circle, and you're simply going to have to turn. However, compounding this problem is the fact you have zero control over your plane's speed. Well, that's not exactly true, as there are speed boost power-ups that can be gotten on the track. However, do not attempt to get a speed boost unless you're going too straight. And there's also super juice, essentially nitrous oxide for the planes, that provides temporary boost of speed that you can control using the A button. But other than that, the plane's speed is automatically controlled by the computer and you always fly as fast as possible. Having said that, your possible top speed will drop if your plane has been damaged, or when you choose to not fly in a straight line. The second part causes your plane to crawl when navigating turns, or attempting to avoid other planes, and your competition will have no problem simply flying away from you down the track, leaving you flying by yourself with no hope of catching up. One of the things the Sega CD was known for was adding scaling and rotation capabilities that didn't previously exist on the Genesis, but that were commonplace on the Super Nintendo, i.e. Mode 7, and that was famously shown off in F-Zero and Super Mario Kart. And Racing Aces seemingly utilizes some of that power, as the game was apparently originally conceived for the Genesis, but the developers moved the game to the Sega CD, as the Genesis alone wasn't powerful enough to do what they had envisioned. And I've got to say, I don't really think the Sega CD was powerful enough either. The game utilizes a very rudimentary 3D engine to lay out the courses, with single-colored polygons marking the track and the surrounding land/mountain areas, with the track polygons being colored one color and the non-track land structures being colored another to delineate the two. The result is a particularly ugly mess that runs at a very low frame rate to boot. This low frame rate contributes to the previously mentioned issues with piloting the planes, and also makes it relatively difficult to line up and shoot down competing planes if you happen to actually get close to one. Of course, the computer has no such issues. I've got a feeling that the 32X may have been able to do this idea justice, as its processors have some ability to do 3D environment rendering, as seen in the ports of Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter, but as is, the game overachieves a bit here. One other race-related issue that I have to mention quickly is the HUD, and what information it provides to the pilot, and what is missing. Present are readings that tell you your speed, radar that points out the competitors and the important gates on the track, and a few icons that mention which power-ups you currently have available with your plane and the quantity of those power-ups. There's also a speed gauge, a clock to let you know how you're doing on lap times, a diagram of your plane and its current damage by section, and finally a readout that gives you your current race position and lap number. Lots of useful information that's easy to read. However, did you notice one very important thing that's not in that list? That almost every racing game at the very least has an option of turning on, if it's not just on the screen automatically? That's right, there's no race map showing you where you are during your lap and where your opponents are. Instead, if you want to see this information, you have to pause the game, and it's present on the pause screen. While it's good that they at least included that information somewhere, having it be on the pause screen is more of a bit distracting if you have to call it up in the middle of a race, and not being able to tell immediately that you might be veering just a bit off course is a definite problem. And due to the single colors of the track versus not the track, it gets very easy to get lost almost instantly. And if you don't pause and view the map right away, you will find yourself in the middle of nowhere, at best losing a bunch of time, and at worst getting destroyed by AA guns or the environment itself. Beyond the particularly disastrous in-game race engine, the rest of the game doesn't have much to offer graphically. The game menus are basic, but get the job done, and Bob at the race shop offers a nice distraction, along with her black market partner. However, I'd like to point out that the pixel art portraits of the various racing pilots. Racing Aces features 30 different pilots that you can either choose for yourself or race against. As far as the game is concerned, it doesn't matter who you choose, as every pilot has the same abilities, but each of the pilots has a portrait that reminds me of old Sierra point-click games, and an individual paint scheme for their planes. Also, depending on who you're racing against, the other pilots will trash talk you with customized text to go along with their character as the race progresses, depending on whether you're doing the shooting or whether you're getting shot. I thought the concept of the different pilot characters was nice and brought some needed flair to the game, both graphically and emotionally, with a nice sense of humor. Playing Sega CD games is always a bit jarring when it comes to the audio, as CD audio is so crisp and clear compared to what the Genesis, or Master System, normally produces. And Racing Aces is no different. The in-game sound effects aren't anything special, with usual explosions, gunshots, and engine noises that you'd expect in a combat racing game. But the CD audio for the in-game music is pretty good. It sounds like you would expect a mid-90s soft rock bass soundtrack to sound like. Plenty of synthesizers and upbeat tempos, but nothing too rocking, with all songs setting an appropriate backdrop to the in-game action, and enough individual tracks so the music doesn't get too repetitive. So, as you can imagine, with the way I've talked about both the graphics and the gameplay, you're probably expecting a really poor rating here, right? Perhaps a 1 star or even the fabled bomb so far only awarded to American Gladiators? Well, no, you see, something strange happened the last day I played the game, when I was recording the footage for this video. As I started to play the game more exclusively with the original 6-button controller, I got better at it. I was able to scrape my way through the first set of races and make it to the second set where, even though the courses became more difficult in places, but not always, the game actually got easier to the point where I reached the third set in the modern jets. I ended up winning first place. What seemed to happen was that while the planes got faster and the tracks got tighter, the computer AI remained the same, to where all I really needed to do was fly competently without going out of my way too much to shoot down opponents or get power-ups. And as a result, the game actually got kind of fun. As a result, I'm giving Racing Aces 2 stars. While there's no possible way to salvage the frame rate and general ugliness of the game, it at least provided an enjoyable time towards the end, and I have to reward that, even if it's just giving it an average rating instead of a poor one. Well, that was Racing Aces, and this review is a definite example of why you have to really make a concerted effort to thoroughly play these games. Because even though I was ready to write this title off completely after the first hour, it sort of won me over in the end. Sort of. Let's not get crazy. I'm still not recommending most people go out and try to find this like some sort of diamond in the rough. Tune in next week as we go back to the Genesis and take a look at another game that I've never played before. But based on things I've seen and read, I'm a bit scared of this one. I'll give you a hint. It's based on a popular children's book series from the 80s and 90s that, if you grew up in that time period, you've probably looked at least one of those titles. Remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.